In 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria and Hungary was assassinated, leading to the outbreak of World War I. But what if he survived this assassination? How would it change the Great War and the fate of Franz Ferdinand, who would become the ruler of Austria-Hungary in 1916 instead of Charles I? Historically, in June 1914, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne visited the city of Sarajevo, located in Bosnia and Herzegovina, a region annexed by Austria-Hungary just 6 years earlier. The Archduke and his wife Sophia embarked on a city tour in a caravan of cars when suddenly a bomb was thrown at their vehicle, missing and injuring many in the following car. Later, after the driver took a wrong turn, their car broke down by a cafe, and the main enemy of Austria appeared, opening fire on the Archduke and his wife. If Gavrilo Princip, the assassin of Franz Ferdinand, had been a poor shot, the Archduke's chances of survival would have significantly increased. In that case, Gavrilo Princip would have been arrested and thrown into prison, and Hungary would have been furious, as it happened in our history. In response, Austria would present an ultimatum to Serbia. This ultimatum, like in our reality, would be harsh, but not as severe. Austria demanded that the Black Hand be disbanded, and anti-Austrian propaganda stopped in Serbia, along with a few minor demands. All these demands would be quite reasonable, and unlike the ultimatum in our story, this one would be accepted by Serbia. Historically, even Russia urged Serbia to accept the ultimatum, hoping it would change the situation against Austria-Hungary. In this alternative history, the Austrians could invade Serbia, trying to find evidence of the Black Hand's connection to the Serbian government. But, as in our reality, no convincing evidence would be found. War had so far been averted, but as Franz Joseph's health deteriorated, panic began to spread through the empire. With Franz Ferdinand alive, he would ascend the throne at the end of 1916, and the Great War would still not have begun, creating many conflicting interests. For the purposes of this video, I will assume that the Great War does not start in 1914 or 1915, as Austria-Hungary does not invade Serbia, which could provoke a chain of alliances. This happens because Serbia accepted the Austrian ultimatum, which was less harsh. Of course, there could have been another event that led to the start of the Great War, but we will never know. Thus, I will allow Franz Ferdinand to rule Austria-Hungary in the year 1916, in the absence of war. However, the continent remains tense, and Germany will seek to unleash war until Russia strengthens and becomes invincible. Franz Ferdinand's politics seem strange. He wanted to grant more autonomy to minorities while strengthening government power and supporting German influence in the country. Historically, he was also very anti-Hungarian, writing extensively about it, claiming that Hungarians were nothing but problems. No one knows exactly how to label him, a liberal or a conservative, as he occasionally drew ideas from both sides, hoping it would work. He had plans to create the United States of Greater Austria, but they were extremely unrealistic. Another interesting idea was that he intended to show softness towards Serbia not because he loved them, but because he did not want to wage a pointless war with Russia. Smarter than his uncle, it seems to me. In 1915 and 1916, politics in Hungary will begin to change. The Independence Party in the year 84 will start to gain popularity, albeit slightly. All minorities will continue to vote for the National Labour Party, which supported the Hungarian Compromise. However, they did not like it and would prefer this over a Hungarian ethnic state. Minorities in the rest of the empire will be cautious but optimistic, as Franz Ferdinand promised more autonomy. One of the first steps I could envision would be the signing of an official non-aggression pact with Serbia to secure the southern flank and improve relations with Russia. I assume that Franz Ferdinand will limit the Hungarian part of the army, as he knows that the Hungarians will oppose the loss of lands in his federalization plans. At the same time, he will insist that German become the official language of the entire army, which will not please the Hungarian part of the empire. Many politicians from the Independence Party in the year 84 will use this to strengthen their popularity, and the party's voice will continue to grow. Soon, Franz Ferdinand will turn to his promises of moral autonomy, focusing on Bohemia, Bosnia, and Croatia, territories he felt the most sympathy for, and which were mostly under Austrian control. Although he could not take radical steps like creating a third crown, I suspect he could create a situation in Bosnia similar to the Kingdom of Croatia and Slavonia in Hungary, where despite the control of the Hungarian government, there was a parliament of its own and some degree of autonomy. If Franz Ferdinand had established a Kingdom of Bosnia, I wouldn't be surprised if he also granted it certain powers. Franz Ferdinand would pressure Hungary to give more autonomy to the Kingdom of Croatia and Slavonia, but the Hungarians would, of course, refuse. Soon Bohemia will receive a similar small kingdom, but the situation will be more complicated. The well-known Sudetenland is part of Bohemia, but mostly populated by Germans. Franz Ferdinand sought to strengthen German control over the empire and did not want to lose these lands to a separate minority. In 1906, he drew a map of the United States of Greater Austria as he envisioned it, and I tried to reproduce it as best as I could. It is unclear what he meant, as the parts of Bohemia inhabited by the ethnic German population were designated as their own states, instead of remaining part of German Austria. These lands would be called German Bohemia and German Moravia, and, in essence, would become separate crown lands. This would create a significant problem, as the two new crowns would raise concerns among German nationalists in Austria-Hungary, who aimed to establish a state with a predominantly German population. At that time, Hungary began to face protests and political movements, which undoubtedly opened new party and political opportunities. Many minorities in Hungary began to demand similar crowns as Austria did, while Hungarian nationalists insisted that Hungary should completely exit the empire, rather than be divided. Chaos escalated until Franz Ferdinand dismissed the Hungarian Prime Minister István, whom he considered a revolutionary and traitor. This move was the last straw, and the Hungarian part of the empire rose in open rebellion, echoing the events of 1848. I believe that Franz Ferdinand will quickly dissolve the Honved, the Hungarian branch of the army. He will also allow Austrian troops to occupy Croatia, effectively increasing its autonomy to the level of Bosnia. These actions will lead to the further spread of the uprising, and while Austria tries to cope with the fire, neighboring countries like Russia and Italy will begin to pay attention to the empire, discussing how to respond to the situation. Germany will propose sending troops to assist Austria, but Franz Ferdinand will likely refuse, as he would not want to show that Austria is weak and forced to rely on foreign powers to solve its problems. This refers to the events of 1848, when the Austrians sought support from Russia to suppress the Hungarian Revolution. Franz Ferdinand will begin to give speeches, stating that he wants to reform the empire so that everyone has the opportunity to influence what happens in the country, and, most importantly, that the Hungarians are hindering his progress. He also promises the kingdoms of Bosnia to any minorities that help the Austrians defeat the Hungarians. The Slovaks are the first to respond to this offer, followed by the Romanians. With this support, and the Hungarian army disbanded and disarmed, I don't think the uprising will last long. For 3 months, martial law will be imposed in Hungary, and not only that, but Slovakia will immediately receive its kingdom. If small territories of Hungary, such as Burgenland, were annexed, it would take some time. But soon Transylvania could also become its own kingdom, leaving what remains of the Hungarian crown under military control. I predict that by the middle of 1917, Franz Ferdinand will change the name of Austria-Hungary to the United States of Greater Austria, redistributing all lands at his discretion, except for the southern part of Austria in Tyrol, where a significant number of Italian speakers live. Part of this land was already claimed by Italy. Officially, the two countries were in an alliance, but over time, cracks began to appear between them. Under some pressure from Germany, I believe that Franz Ferdinand will agree to transfer Italian territories in Tyrol to Italy to strengthen their loyalty, instead of creating a separate Italian crown in exchange for monetary compensation or more favorable trade agreements. It should be remembered that in this alternative history, the Great War has not yet begun, but I believe it is inevitable. So some alternative event must occur that will trigger the start of the Great War, and it is impossible to predict what this event will be. I will have to come up with what could have triggered the Great Conflict in 1917 or 1918. At this moment, you might think that, of course, it's wonderful. All minorities have autonomy, Austria controls the country, and Hungary is also under control. Nothing can go wrong. However, I would argue that this is a multinational empire, and generally, it rarely ends well. Despite Franz Ferdinand granting autonomy to minorities, he was not a good person when it came to representation in government. He was a staunch anti-democrat and claimed that politics was the affair of the ruler, and the people and masses should obey. Many German nationalists had mixed feelings about him. Some supported the consolidation of power to strengthen German influence, while others argued that the autonomy granted to all would work against them and complicate the imposition of their will. Overall, I believe that Austria-Hungary has become less stable. Gradually, the inhabitants of the empire will begin to demand more autonomy, dissatisfied with the lack of representation in the government and the fact that all officials are effectively controlled by the king. Franz Ferdinand will try to negotiate with the people, but he will be unyielding and often clash with their leaders. What he is trying to achieve is simply impossible. A government with most, if not all, of the power that simultaneously grants autonomy to minorities can hardly withstand pressure. Most likely, Franz Ferdinand will be able to calm a few small minorities, such as Germans, Italians, Istrians, and possibly Slovenians. But I do not see the other lands becoming equally calm. One by one, these territories will begin to experience protests and uprisings. A few years ago, a rebellion broke out in Hungary, but this time the uprising occurred on a much larger scale. Neighboring countries like Romania, Serbia, and Russia began to assist the rebellious minorities, while Germany supported Franz Ferdinand and his government. I predict that by 1919, a civil war will begin in the country, starting in Bosnia and quickly spreading to Croatia, Vojvodina, and Transylvania before the government can respond. The entire southern and eastern part of the country will be in open rebellion. Franz Ferdinand will give the order to suppress the rebellions, while the Hungarians will also begin their attacks, aiming to reclaim lost territories in the north. Ukrainians and Poles, supported by Russia, will start capturing major cities like Lviv and others, halting the work of government institutions. Franz Ferdinand will declare a national emergency and mobilize the entire army, a significant part of which has already been dismissed, disbanded, or executed for possible ties to uprisings. In a few months, the borders may look as follows. It would be foolish to believe that there will be no external influence. For example, Russia, as already mentioned, will assist Ukraine and Poland in hopes of creating puppet states. Serbia will begin supplying weapons to Bosnia and Croatia and will take the opportunity to lift many restrictions imposed on it in 1914 as a result of the ultimatum from Austria-Hungary. Romania will also actively support Transylvania, a territory it has long wanted to annex. Austria, in turn, will receive support from Germany, as well as some assistance from Italy. I also expect that Italy will ask for the return of the remaining territories with Italian population in Istria in exchange for greater support that will likely be provided to the Austrian side. Overall, Austria is like a domino. If one is pushed, the entire empire will collapse like a house of cards that appears stable and strong until a small problem occurs. France and Great Britain will watch from afar, not intervening in the conflict, but preparing for possible intervention. Don't get me wrong, they don't want Germany to remain strong, but they also recognize Russia's influence in the region, as they don't want this Eastern European giant to seize power and become a hegemon in Europe. Perhaps France and Britain will allow Germany and Russia to deplete their forces a bit before moving to a more aggressive policy against Germany. This is because if France and Britain declare war on Germany, Russia will soon become the dominant power in Europe, and they will have to worry about it after resolving the issue with Germany. This alternative Austrian civil conflict could develop in various scenarios. Perhaps Austria, having an official army and receiving the most support from the state, could unite most of the empire with minor concessions to Serbia, Romania, and Russia. But this would be very boring, as the Great War would start similarly, and the outcome would remain the same. Perhaps the war would have turned into trench warfare, and the borders would not have changed for several years until peace was signed. The map would look roughly the same, but that is also uninteresting and unaesthetic. Perhaps Hungary would restore its former borders, while the rest of the empire would be divided among neighboring states. Although this is not boring, it is too unrealistic. I want to say that it is impossible to predict the exact outcome of this war from this moment. Just keep this in mind. It's pure fiction. It is also worth noting that the following decisions sacrifice realism. Franz Ferdinand, the monarch of Austria-Hungary, reforming the empire, is a clear sign of unrealism. I would sacrifice some realism for the sake of creating a more engaging scenario. Now, with the Civil War, there will be temporary alliances from the very beginning. For example, in the south, Croatia and Bosnia will likely agree to unite for better protection. Bosnia has already received what it wanted, while Croatia likely wants part of Bosnia, but it will be more strategically advantageous for them to ally at this moment. In Galicia, Ukrainians and Poles will be a sort of armed formations, mostly forced to act under Russia's orders. Poland really wants to capture Ukraine, but they will have to follow orders and, frankly, lack troops. Hungary will be an informal ally of Second, the Hungarian majority in Transylvania. These two countries will cooperate and attempt to seize Transylvania, ultimately striving for autonomy. The Czechs and Slovaks are likely to be ready for cooperation, as they are surrounded by enemies and have similar interests. Slovakia will be in a desperate situation. Franz Ferdinand will likely want to first capture Bohemia, where most of the Austrian industry and a significant German population are concentrated. The main part of the Austrian army will be sent there, as capturing the industry will give them an advantage in the civil war. Austrian offensives will be focused on Prague, the capital of Bohemia. They will be successful, but I think the Czech forces and Slovaks will be able to deliver a crushing blow near Bratislava to divert the Austrian army south. The Croats and Bosnians will be able to keep the Hungarians at bay. Nevertheless, Hungary will keep most of its troops in Transylvania, trying to connect with Second in Galicia. Poland and Ukraine will remain on the defensive, using the Carpathian Mountains as protection against major invasions, to focus on gaining recognition and support for their claims. I do not want to go into the details of this war, as it would be impossible, but I can tell about the results in just over a year. Halfway to the war, Austria found itself on the brink of collapse.